Well, welcome back, everybody, and today we're going to be finishing up Chapter 7, which is dealing, of course, with interventions, and today we're going to take a look at some of the cultural context in which interventions and change will take place. So let's go ahead and get started today. Well, welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to finish up Chapter 7 as we take a look a little bit more in depth at designing interventions. Now, we left off yesterday talking about the power of culture and the influence of culture. Now, there's different dimensions of culture that we need to explore, and it's what this chapter finishes up in doing. We have context orientation, power distance, uncertainty avoidance, achievement orientation, and individualism. Now, I believe we have talked about these in the past, maybe not in depth, but it's important to understand that not every culture is going to be similar in the way that they handle these different areas of concern. Now, whether you're going overseas or whether you have someone come and work in your company from a different culture, understanding these different values will help you in the ability to be able to create a better workforce, to be able to be more conducive to diversity in your workforce, and to be more efficient and more effective. So let's take a look at these. Context orientation. When you're communicating, context means a lot. Now, there are some cultures that take you at your word. Yes means yes, no means no. And that's pretty much it. We here in Western culture oftentimes interpret communications based on the context in which it's said, or based on the way that it's being said. The extent and the definition for this is the extent to which meaning and communication is carried in the words. So an organization in high context cultures tend to value ceremony and ritual. The structure is less formal. There are fewer written policies, and people are often late for appointments. For instance, I understand in Central America, they are big on ritual and ceremony, and a meeting can be scheduled for 1, but they may show up at 3, and that'd be okay. So there's not a lot of adherence to formality and protocol in some of these cultures. Whereas if you showed up late in some cultures, they won't even talk to you. Here, if you're late for an appointment, you are seen as maybe irresponsible, or you don't care, or you're not seen in the most positive light. So the context in which communication is made, not just verbal, but you see here that ceremony and ritual are in a part of that as well. Now, power distance. That's the extent to which members of society accept that status and power are distributed unequally in an organization. Organizations in these cultures tend to be autocratic, possess clear status differences, and have little employee participation. These are the old models of organizational structure and design. Back in the days of Henry Ford and the bureaucracies and the autocratic structures and management styles, these were organizations that were led from the top, the president or the CEO, and everything flowed downhill to vice presidents, to operations managers and supervisors and so forth. That is what's called a centralized power structure, where everything is centralized at the top. Communication is very slow. There's very little communication from the bottom up to management. It's mainly just the top-down approach where managers communicate with the employees, and that's it, because they really don't care about the employees' input or really solicit that. So these organizations are steeped in rules and regulations, and they have that hierarchy of authority. The assembly line worker, let's say, could not just walk into the operation manager's office. They had to go through their supervisor, and that supervisor had to go through his or her supervisor, and so on until it got to the manager or the person intended to receive the communication, and then it had to go all the way back down that way. The military, for instance, is like this. You don't just walk into the captain's office. You have to go through different levels of authority to be able to even get an audience with the senior military officials. So cultures like this, they tend to be very rigid. They're not very agile as far as being able to respond quickly to the environment, because the only people who can make decisions and the only ones who are recognized as being able to know what's best for the organization are those at the very top. So that's power distance, the recognition that this organization, and we're comfortable with this, is a highly stratified or segmented hierarchy of authority. Uncertainty avoidance. And that's the extent to which members of a society tolerate the unfamiliar and unpredictable. Organizations in these cultures tend to value experts, prefer clear roles, avoid conflict, and resist change. So there are some who are in Western culture who are like that. They just don't want to take a risk. Oftentimes, people become a victim of their own success. Sears, for instance, was happy the way they were doing things. And as other companies started to evolve into a more customer-friendly, customer-responsive type of structure, Sears believed, we have been around all this time and we don't need to change our way of doing things. So let's stick with what we know. And a lot of organizations are like that. They will stick with what they know and they suffer the consequences for it. But there are, in different areas of the world, cultures and organizations, as a result, would prefer to avoid any type of conflict, to resist change, and to have everything laid out before they will do business with you or before they will act on anything. Achievement orientation, that's the extent to which people in a society value assertiveness and the acquisition of material goods. Now, these organizations tend to associate achievement with wealth and recognition. They value decisiveness, and gender roles are clearly differentiated. And a lot of times these are considered to be masculine roles, where the men are aggressive and they're seen as the aggressor, and they go out for material gain. So we do have those here, and the value of the organization is based upon how much money they can accumulate or the material goods they can accumulate. So you have to be assertive, and the person who ends with the most toys wins. So that's the kind of philosophy they have. Individualism. And that's the extent to which people in a society believe they should be responsible for themselves and their immediate family. Now, these people, organizations in these cultures, tend to encourage personal initiative, value time and autonomy, accept competition, and autonomy is highly valued in an individualistic society, and that's what Western society is classified as. It's all about the person. We reward individual performance. For instance, go out to the parking lot of some of the stores that you have in your area and see if there's an employee parking, employee of the month, employee of the year, or see if there are pictures on the wall of employees of the month. You won't see groups of the month, and you won't see a whole section of parking lot dedicated to a group of the month. It's always the individual. Oftentimes bonuses are given out on an individual basis. This is what Western culture, our culture, has been used to for, since the rise of the industrial age. We have been focused on individual performance, and that's what we reward or we punish for the lack of performance. Now, in a collectivist society, such as Japan, Japan is a highly collectivist type of culture. And I may show a video on working in Japan and how their culture is, but they believe that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. That's that Star Trek quote. They're not just quoting it, though, they live it. It's not uncommon for them to work extraordinary hours. In fact, there's even a term in Japan that they use for those who have died from overwork. They don't want to let the company down. They don't want to let their teammates down or the organization down. So they don't regard themselves as important. Rather, they just see themselves as one element to support the overall culture of the organization. So if you try to, I guess, go to Japan and reward an individual, they see it as dishonorable. They are offended by that. And you take someone who comes over there and works here, it may take them a while to adjust to the idea that we prize individual behavior. And this is why Deming had such a hard time getting TQM off here in Western society, because Deming really was the one who promoted this type of ideology into Japanese culture. He believed that the employees should be empowered, that the employees should work together in groups, that the whole is going to produce much more than what they would be able to produce on their own. And we laughed him out of the country. But he went to Japan and they made him an idol because they embraced that philosophy. And that's what they stuck with. So individualism and collectivism are two different areas of the spectrum, but both can be positive, and both have their downsides as well. Economic development, that's another area when you're looking at change and trying to develop organizations. You have subsistence economies, which are primarily agricultural based. They're not really industrialized. There are many places in the world today that do not have the resources for technology and industry that we have here. You have industrializing economies. They're moderately developed and tend to be rich in natural resources. I was down in Central America, and they have a lot of natural resources, and they are becoming more industrialized. In fact, I saw Caterpillar down there. That used to be here in Memphis, but they moved down there because of economic incentives. So we're seeing that area emerge. India may be another area as well. And then industrial economies. They're highly developed and emphasize non-agricultural industry. So we have evolved even from the industrial age to the information age today. So what you see today, where there's a heavy amount of industry, these people are still lagging behind in a lot of ways, because we have even evolved from industry to technology today. And it'll be interesting to see how other countries catch up to that. Now, some other contingencies related to the target of change. You have the organization as a whole. What are going to be your strategic issues once the change occurs? Are you going to change the technical and structural portion of your organization? What about your human resources? How is that going to be effective? And how they interrelate through human processes. All of these things will be impacted by whatever change takes place and the strategies that you incorporate as a result of that. At the organizational level, you're going to have two individual, group, organization, and trans-organizational changes to take place. The organization will filter down to the groups will filter down to the individuals. And if you become more of a organic structure, you're going to find that working together is going to be a requirement. You're going to have to take on a lot of the philosophies of the Japanese, where you are more collectivist in nature than individuals. So it'll be something that will require a whole paradigm shift within the management philosophy of today, because as I said, today we're still ingrained from a leadership and management perspective to be individually based, to look at individual performance. And the organic structures today, the learning organizations, are realizing how much value collaboration is bringing to the overall performance of an organization, and many are starting to embrace that. And I believe others are going to have to embrace that if they're going to survive in the 21st century. From a strategic standpoint, what are the functions, products, services? We've talked about that. How can you gain competitive advantage? Now, competitive advantage is what you do better than anybody else in that industry. It begins with a core competency. A core competency is something that you do well, and you do it better than your competitors. It may be the product. It may be superior than what your competition is producing. It may be a process, such as the way that you produce that product, that is superior to your competition. You may have other areas of competitive advantage. Your HR or your marketing may be better than your competition. But whatever you do well, at least over your rivals, that's a competitive, or that's a core competency. When you do it consistently and your competition can't match it, that's when you have a competitive advantage. And that's how companies stay in business, and other companies who can't compete fall by the wayside. Other strategic issues are how to relate to the environment. You know, we're becoming more environmentally friendly, and there's probably few Fortune 500 companies out there that don't have some type of environmental strategy to improve the world around them. And what values are going to guide your organization and what it does. Your values may change. The things that you regarded as sacred once may not be as important, given way to the changes that are going to have to take place and the new ways of thinking that will have to accompany them. From a technology and structure, how are you going to divide out labor? How are you going to coordinate departments? Again, in a learning organization, there's going to be less stratification. There's going to be less division. So you're going to have to learn to collaborate and bring people together from a holistic standpoint. How to produce products or services, how to design work, and not only from a personnel standpoint, but also from a technology standpoint. Are you going to be able to accommodate the technical requirements that these changes are going to require? And then human resource and human processes. How are you going to attract competent people? Well, there's several strategies that you can use to bring in the best and the brightest, but you have to know what is the competition doing? What can you do above and beyond what the competition is doing? What is it that the people are looking for? And also, when you take a look at what a competent person is, you not only have to take a look at their job itself, but does this person fit into the organization from a value standpoint, from a motivation maybe or attitude standpoint? And how are you going to set goals and reward them for meeting those goals? And also, too, in a learning organization, we're all about now developing the people. So how are you going to plan and develop their careers? Now, also, too, from a human process issue, how to communicate, solve problems, make decisions, interact. How do you lead them? All of these things go into the human element within the organization. And as a result of that, if you have these areas working for you, then folks, your whole organization is going to outperform the competition, because most companies today flounder in any and in all of these areas. They struggle because it is a challenge to be able to meet the needs and the demand of a global economy, diverse cultures, and technology, the way that it is changing and shaping business today. It has an impact not only on the structure and the product and services, but also the people as well. Well, as you see, cultures can be very complex and difficult to deal with if you're unaware or really not used to dealing with people of diversity and diverse issues. So hopefully today we had a chance to show you some of the elements that involve diversity and the cultural differences that can take place, and how to hopefully deal with them in a better way. That's all we have for today, and you have a good rest of the week.